Ancient voices once filled temples with chants we can no longer hear. We are about to uncover 28 lost rituals and ceremonies that vanished from the world's oldest mythologies. By the end, you will understand the profound human needs these practices fulfilled and why their disappearance still matters today. Why did Maya royalty draw their own blood to speak with gods? And what secret knowledge died with Greek initiates who swore never to speak of their experiences? What forgotten part of our own humanity disappeared when these sacred fires went out for the last time? The stones of Stonehenge once anchored an entire world. For the people who gathered there at the solstice, the alignment of massive rocks was not an abstract astronomical feat. It was the very heartbeat of their survival. Their crops, their food, their future depended on correctly reading the sky and performing the ceremonies that kept the cosmos in balance. This was the profound significance of ritual in ancient life. It was the framework upon which societies were built, transforming the terrifying chaos of nature into an ordered, meaningful existence. These ceremonies gave structure to the journey of a human life, marking the sacred passages from birth to adulthood, from marriage to death. They were not just observances, they were the glue that bonded communities together, creating what anthropologists call a collective effervescence, a shared emotional high that strengthened social ties far more powerfully than any law. Rituals served intensely practical purposes as well. A successful harvest, protection from plague or famine, the legitimization of a ruler's power, all hinged on the correct performance of sacred acts. When these practices vanished, it was not merely a change of fashion. It represented a fundamental rupture in the human relationship with the divine, a shift in how we see our place in the universe. To understand the depth of what was lost, we begin in ancient Egypt, where the daily rebirth of the sun was not taken for granted, but demanded a secret, nightly ritual performed in absolute darkness. Deep within silent tombs, the final journey began not with burial, but with a touch of cold metal to stone-cold lips. The opening of the mouth ceremony was the ancient Egyptians' ultimate act of love and duty, a profound ritual designed to wake the dead for eternity. Imagine the scene not as a morbid farewell, but as a desperate and hopeful reanimation. Priests in pure white linen would stand over the mummified body, their movements precise and charged with power. They used a set of sacred tools, a ceremonial adze, a pea-shent knife, each one imbued with specific magic. Their goal was breathtakingly intimate, to restore the senses that death had stolen. By touching the mouth, the eyes, the ears, and the nose while reciting potent spells from the Book of the Dead, they were not merely honoring the deceased. They were performing spiritual surgery, rebuilding the bridge between the world of the living and the world of the gods. The great Egyptologist E. A. Wallace Budge described how this ritual transformed the person into an Ak, an effective or shining spirit. This was not a ghost doomed to wander, but a perfected being capable of action, able to eat the food offerings left by family, drink the water of life, and breathe the air of the afterlife. The ceremony unfolded in elaborate stages, from purification with water and incense to the presentation of offerings. The climax involved a forked instrument, shaped to represent the leg of the bull in the constellation Ursa Major, prying open the mouth to restore its functions. This was the moment of rebirth, but this deeply held belief, this intricate technology for the soul, could not survive the shifting sands of faith. As Christianity spread across Egypt, bringing with it a new vision of heaven and resurrection, the old gods were silenced. The priests who knew the precise gestures and the exact words eventually passed from the world, and with them died the knowledge of how to open a mouth for eternity. The silence that followed in those tombs was more than an absence of sound. It was the end of a 3,000-year conversation with the dead. From this intimate ritual of individual salvation, we journey to the vast plains of North America, where an entire community's survival once hinged on a ceremony that has since vanished into the wind. The stingray spine was not an instrument of torture, but a key to the heavens. For the Maya, a civilization that saw the cosmos as a delicate, living entity, the most sacred duty of a king or queen was to open a portal to the other side. This was the bloodletting ceremony, a vision quest where royal blood became the ultimate offering. In the deep quiet of a temple, under the weight of an elaborate jade headdress, a ruler would take a sharpened stingray spine or a blade of obsidian. They would then draw blood from their own tongue, their earlobes, or even their genitals, a self-sacrifice of profound intimacy and pain. The act was not one of mere suffering, but of transformation. The pain itself was a gateway, a catalyst that propelled the ruler's consciousness into a trance state, a realm where they could commune directly with ancestral spirits and the gods themselves. The blood, collected on strips of bark paper, was not wasted. These paper strips were burned in ceremonial censers, the rising smoke carrying the very essence of royal life force upward, a direct line of communication to sustain the gods and maintain the cosmic order. The visions that followed were not hallucinations, they were divine intelligence. A king might see the location of a future battle, receive a warning of drought, or learn the perfect time for planting maize. These were not private spiritual experiences. They were matters of state security and communal survival, guiding the very fate of the city. Scholars like Linda Shields showed us that these rituals were the bedrock of Maya power, a public demonstration of a ruler's piety and their willingness to endure ultimate personal sacrifice for their people. But this profound covenant between the human and the divine could not hold forever. As Maya cities faced prolonged droughts, famine, and escalating warfare, the cosmic balance seemed to shatter. The rituals that once secured the world's order began to feel futile in the face of such chaos. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived, the great bloodletting ceremonies had already faded from many centers, their deep meaning lost even to the descendants of those who once performed them. We are left to wonder what final vision or what profound silence a Maya king witnessed before this sacred practice vanished forever. This belief that the cosmos demanded a physical, painful offering finds a startling echo far across the world in the sun-drenched sanctuaries of classical Greece. For 3 days each autumn, the social order of ancient Athens turned upside down. Wives and mothers, the keepers of the household, abandoned their domestic duties and established their own city on the Phoenix Hill, the very place where men normally debated politics and war. This was the Thesmophoria, a festival so vital to the city's survival that the entire government would pause, its functioning dependent on the secret rites performed by women from which all men were strictly barred. At its heart, the festival reenacted the myth of Demeter and her daughter Persephone. The women fasted in solidarity with Demeter's grief while her daughter was in the underworld, and they engaged in astrology, the ritual exchange of obscene jokes and insults which was believed to promote fertility. The most profound act of the ceremony involved objects called ballets. Weeks before the festival, women would cast sacrificial pigs, along with pine cones and dough shaped like phalluses, into deep, snake-inhabited pits known as megara. During the Thesmophoria, chosen women called antultriae or balers would descend into these chasms to retrieve the now decayed remains. This was a direct symbolic connection to Persephone's descent into the earth. The retrieved material was then placed on altars and later mixed with the year's seed grain before planting. As the scholar Walter Burkert observed, this act powerfully linked women's control over biological reproduction with the community's dependence on agricultural reproduction. The festival was a rare, sanctioned space for female solidarity and power, a world within a world where women held the keys to the city's future. but this powerful female mystery could not survive the new religious landscape. With the rise of Christianity, which viewed such pagan rites with deep suspicion and often suppressed women's religious roles, the Thesmophoria faded into silence. Its loss represents more than just the end of a harvest ritual. It signifies the erasure of a unique form of ancient female authority and the communal bonds it fostered. As the memory of this women-led ceremony vanished, we journey north to a time when the sun itself seemed to die, and people gathered to light fires against an endless night. In the deep midwinter dark of Scandinavia, a sacred boar was led into a chieftain's hall. The air, thick with wood smoke and the scent of mead, fell silent as each warrior stepped forward to lay a hand upon the animal's bristling back. This was the Sonargöltr, the center of the Norse Yule celebration, and every oath sworn upon it was sealed with the blood of a god. The boar was a living pledge dedicated to Freya, the deity of fertility, peace, and prosperity. To swear upon it was to invite divine witness, transforming a simple promise into a cosmic contract. A vow made before one's chieftain and comrades was one thing, but a vow sworn on the Sonargöltr was unbreakable, its consequences echoing into the afterlife itself. The poetic Edda recounts how warriors would hie to Sonargöltr, a phrase that meant to make a solemn vow on this ritual animal. After the oaths were sworn, the boar was sacrificed, and its meat was consumed in a great communal feast, an act that physically bonded the community to their shared commitments. This was not a casual winter festival. It was the spiritual and social glue of the Viking world, a time to reaffirm loyalties and set the course for the year ahead under the watchful eyes of the gods. But as Christian missionaries slowly spread their new faith across the north, they targeted this very practice. The sacrifice of an animal to an old god was seen as pagan idolatry. The deeply personal, physically tangible act of swearing on a sacred boar was replaced by the Christian oath, sworn on a Bible, a shift that moved the source of a vow's power from a communal, tangible ritual to a more abstract, textual authority. We lost more than just a tradition. We lost an ancient way of making a promise that engaged the senses, the community, and the very land itself. From the frigid halls of the Norse, our search for lost rituals turns back to the relentless heat of Egypt, where a different kind of ceremony unfolded, one that kept the sun itself on its daily course. The sheer endurance of a pharaoh was a matter of national security. In the blistering Egyptian sun, a king, often elderly and adorned in the heavy regalia of his office, would run a ritual course between two markers representing the very borders of his kingdom. This was the Heb-Sed festival, a jubilee celebration held after 30 years of a pharaoh's rule and every few years thereafter, and it was the ultimate test of royal legitimacy. Its purpose was not merely to celebrate a long reign, but to magically regenerate the pharaoh's strength and, by extension, the vitality of the entire land of Egypt. The ceremony was a complex theatrical production of power. At the Djoser complex in Saqqara, intricate reliefs show the king engaged in ritual combat, perhaps symbolically defeating the forces of chaos. He would sit alternately on two thrones, embodying his rule over both Upper and Lower Egypt, and receive symbols of dominion from the gods of each region, the nomes. As the scholar Margaret Murray argued, this was a symbolic death and rebirth of the king's divine power. The entire performance, witnessed by regional governors and priests, was a public reaffirmation of a cosmic contract. If the pharaoh could not physically demonstrate his vigor, how could he possibly ensure the Nile would flood or the harvests would be abundant? The state's stability depended on this ritual. But this profound link between a leader's physical body and the health of the nation could not endure forever. As Egypt fell under successive waves of foreign rule, first by the Persians, then the Greeks, and finally the Romans, the native pharaonic line was broken. The conquering rulers had no need for or belief in the ancient magic of the Heb-Sed. the last known celebration faded into history, leaving us to wonder about a world where a king had to run to prove he was still fit to rule. This concept of a ritual that tested and transformed a leader finds a strange parallel in the shadowy initiation rites of ancient Greece, where the stakes were not a kingdom, but the fate of the human soul itself. For nearly 2,000 years, a profound silence was kept. The men and women who walked the sacred way from Athens to Eleusis each autumn carried a secret to their graves, a spiritual truth so powerful that to reveal it was punishable by death. The Eleusinian Mysteries were not merely a festival, they were the most sought-after initiation in the ancient world, a 9-day journey that promised to erase the fear of death itself. At its heart was the myth of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, and her daughter Persephone, who was abducted into the underworld. For the initiates, this was not just a story, it was a map of the soul's own journey through despair and into a state of grace. The ritual meticulously recreated this path. Participants would first purify themselves in the sea at Phaleron, a symbolic washing away of their old lives. They then began a solemn 14-mile procession to the sanctuary at Eleusis, fasting as they walked in solidarity with Demeter's grief. The climax occurred inside the Telesterion, a vast, windowless hall designed to disorient the senses. In that total darkness, amid chanting and the shaking of bronze gongs, the high priest, the Hierophant, would suddenly reveal sacred objects from a chest. Ancient sources speak of a dazzling, supernatural light flooding the hall at this moment, a light that may have been produced by focusing mirrors or even by a chemical compound like quicklime. Some scholars, like Carl Ruck, have theorized that a psychoactive substance, perhaps a barley ergot infusion known as kykeon, was consumed, triggering visionary states that made the drama feel utterly real. The initiate was no longer an observer, but a participant in the divine drama, experiencing the joy of Persephone's return firsthand. The Roman orator Cicero, who was himself initiated, wrote that the rites taught him how to live with joy and how to die with better hope. This was the ultimate gift of Eleusis, a visceral, personal assurance that life existed beyond the grave. Its destruction was as brutal as its rituals were subtle. In the year 396, a Gothic army under Alaric swept into Greece and demolished the sanctuary. The last Hierophant fled, taking the sacred words with him, and a spiritual technology that had comforted generations from Plato to Roman emperors vanished from the earth. The loss is immeasurable, a direct line to the ancient psyche severed forever. This deep human desire for purification, to wash away spiritual contamination, was a driving force in another great civilization, one that built its empire on law and order. The streets of Rome echoed with a spectacle of primal chaos each February. Nearly naked young men, the Lupercalia, sprinted through the city, their bodies smeared with the blood of sacrificed goats. In their hands they carried strips of the very same goat hide fashioned into whips, and as they ran, they struck any woman who came within reach. To our modern eyes, this looks like sheer frenzy, but for the Romans, the Lupercalia was a deeply calculated ritual of purification and fertility. It connected the polished marble heart of the empire back to its humble, pastoral origins. The ceremony began at the Lupercal cave at the foot of the Palatine Hill, the very spot where the she-wolf was said to have suckled the infant founders, Romulus and Remus. Here, priests would sacrifice goats and a dog, anoint the Lupercalia with the blood, and then cut the goat hides into the sacred thongs. The running and the striking that followed was not an act of punishment, but of magic. Women would willingly line the route, offering their hands to be struck, firmly believing the contact would cure infertility and guarantee easy childbirth. The act was a symbolic transfer of the wild, untamed fertility of the animal and the land directly into the bodies of the city's women, ensuring the future generation of Roman citizens. This raw, physical connection to the forces of life persisted for centuries, even as Rome became a sprawling, sophisticated empire, but its very physicality made it a target. In the 5th century, Pope Gelasius I formally condemned and suppressed the Lupercalia, replacing it with the more solemn feast of the Purification. This was not a simple erasure, but a strategic absorption. The Church took the ancient human need for seasonal cleansing and redirected it toward a new divine figure, transforming a riotous run into a quiet candlelit procession. The visceral, community-wide ritual was replaced by an internal, personal faith, severing a direct, physical link to the city's mythical past. This shift from a public, embodied ceremony to a private, spiritual observance marks a profound change in how humans related to the divine. And it makes us wonder what other raw, physical connections to creation we have lost. To find an even older example, we must look to a civilization that celebrated the very essence of life itself in the dizzying twists and leaps of a sacred dance. The graceful arc of a human body soaring over a bull's horns was a prayer in motion. On the island of Crete, the Minoans transformed the raw, terrifying power of the bull into a sacred spectacle of grace and courage. The famous frescoes from the Palace of Knossos do not show a chaotic bloodsport, but a highly choreographed ritual, a breathtaking fusion of athleticism, theater, and deep religious belief. This was bull leaping, and it was likely the centerpiece of Minoan public life. Teams of young men and women, dressed in elaborate ceremonial loincloths, worked in perfect synchrony. One would grasp the horns of the charging bull, using the animal's own violent head toss to propel them into a high somersault. A second teammate, positioned behind the bull, would be ready to catch the leaper and guide them to a safe landing. The timing had to be flawless, a split-second dance with death that demonstrated supreme control over mind and body. For the Minoans, the bull was not just a fearsome beast, it was a potent symbol, perhaps of male virility, of untamed nature, or even a connection to a solar deity. By confronting and literally vaulting over this symbol, the leapers were not merely showing off their skill. They were performing a symbolic act of human mastery over the chaotic forces of the world, a ritual that reaffirmed their culture's place in the cosmic order. This profound relationship with the animal world, expressed through such a dangerous and beautiful public ceremony, could not survive the collapse of the society that created it. When the Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland conquered Crete around 1450 BC, their culture was more warlike, their gods were different, and their rituals did not include this delicate, acrobatic pact with the bull. The palace courtyards fell silent, the vibrant frescoes were buried, and the knowledge of how to turn a charge into a prayer was lost forever. We are left with only the frozen image of the leap, a silent testament to a unique bond between humanity and nature that the world would not see again. This imperial shift brings us to the heart of a vast Persian empire, where order was maintained not by leaping over beasts, but through a ceremony of profound, visible submission. The eternal flame was more than a symbol, it was a divine witness. In the heart of Zoroastrian fire temples, priests known as Magi maintained a sacred fire that was never allowed to die, reciting ancient hymns from the Avesta during the spring equinox celebration of Nowruz. This was not just a New Year festival, it was a cosmic reset, a ritual realignment of the world with the forces of light against the creeping power of darkness. The ceremonies were meticulously structured over 5 days, each with its own specific rites dedicated to different aspects of creation and social life. Inside the temple, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood and myrrh, a priest would face the sacred fire, the Atashbarum, to perform the yasna ceremony. He held a bundle of slender metal rods called balsam twigs, representing the vegetable kingdom, and prepared a ritual drink in a hayama mortar, a potent link to the plant of immortality. Every gesture, every chant was a thread in the fabric of cosmic order, a direct collaboration with the divine to hold back the lie of chaos. Outside the temple walls, the ritual extended to the very top of society. Historical accounts describe how the Persian king would hold a grand audience, receiving subjects from every corner of the empire, from the highest noble to the most humble farmer. The exchange of gifts was not merely generous, it was a powerful reinforcement of the social hierarchy, a ritual performance of the king's role as the axis mundi, the central pillar connecting heaven and earth. The entire celebration was a perfect fusion of the spiritual and the political, but the specifically Zoroastrian temple rites, the profound theological meaning behind the flames, could not withstand the seismic shift of the Islamic conquest of Persia in the 7th century. While the beautiful and resilient tradition of Nowruz itself survived, adapting into a magnificent cultural holiday, the deep religious engine that once powered it slowly faded. The eternal flames in many temples were extinguished, and the precise knowledge of the ancient yasna rituals retreated into small, secluded communities. This is a particular kind of loss, the quiet emptying of sacred meaning from a vessel that remains. It shows us how a practice can endure for millennia, yet become a ghost of its former self, its soul departed long ago. This fading of a great imperial faith finds a strange echo in the misty highlands of a much older Europe, where a mysterious Celtic ceremony bound a king to his land in the most intimate way possible. A giant wicker figure stood silhouetted against the twilight, its hollow form filled with the sounds of life. Julius Caesar recorded this chilling spectacle in his accounts of the Gallic Wars, describing how the Celts constructed colossal man-shaped cages from woven wood, filled them with living offerings of animals and sometimes humans, and set the entire structure ablaze as a supreme offering to their gods. While we must approach Caesar's words with caution, as they were written by a conqueror seeking to justify his campaigns, archaeological digs at sites like Ribe-Mont-sur-Ancre in France reveal massive bone deposits consistent with large-scale ritual fires. This was not mere brutality, it was a ceremony of immense symbolic power. The Wicker Man was a perfect vessel for the Celtic worldview, a temporary body for the community's collective offering. By consuming the sacrifice in a single, spectacular conflagration, the ritual transformed life into pure spiritual energy, a desperate plea sent skyward to appease deities like Tyrannis the Thunderer or Essus the Harvester. It was a brutal form of cosmic accounting, a transaction intended to guarantee fertile fields, victorious battles, and the continued favor of capricious gods. The coordination required was itself a display of political authority, with druids and chieftains overseeing the construction and consecration, likely during pivotal festivals like Beltane that marked the beginning of the pastoral summer season. When Roman legions marched through Gaul and Britain, they systematically dismantled the power of the Druids and suppressed such public, pagan spectacles. The great wicker giants were never built again, and with them vanished a visceral understanding of a belief system where the prosperity of the many could be bought with the ultimate sacrifice of a few. The eerie echoes of this practice may linger in folk traditions like the burning of the Zozobra effigy or Guy Fawkes' Night, but the profound, terrifying theology that gave the original ritual its meaning is gone forever. This concept of a mountaintop offering brings us to the high Andes, where an empire communicated with its gods through a different kind of sacred fire. A child's final breath on a mountaintop was the ultimate offering to sustain an empire. The Inca Capacocha ceremony was not an act of cruelty, but a profound transaction with the very forces of nature. In times of crisis, a volcanic eruption, a terrible drought, or the ascension of a new emperor, the Sapa Inca would order this most sacred of rituals to restore cosmic balance. The children chosen for this duty were not random victims. They were flawless boys and girls, often from noble families, considered pure enough to serve as messengers to the Apus, the powerful mountain gods who controlled weather and water. Their journey was a royal procession across the empire, a visible demonstration of the state's power and piety. As they traveled toward the sacred peaks, they were fed special foods and given chicha, a maize beer, and likely coca leaves to ease their passage into a sacred state. At the summit, in the thin, freezing air, priests would administer a powerful intoxicant, perhaps a mixture derived from the vilca tree, to sedate the child before the final act. The discovery of mummies like the Ice Maiden of Ampoto gives us a heartbreakingly vivid picture of the ceremony. She was dressed in an exquisite tunic and a feathered headdress, surrounded by miniature gold and silver figurines, shell necklaces, and pottery containing food. These were not mere grave goods, they were provisions for her journey into the next world, where she would become a permanent, deified intermediary, living with the gods and advocating for the people she left behind. The Spanish conquest shattered this complex theology. They saw only horrific paganism, not a reciprocal relationship with the landscape. While the veneration of mountain spirits persists in the Andes today, the Capacocha itself is gone, and with it, a complete understanding of what it meant to send a perfect child to live among the gods. This belief that a human life could bargain with the elements finds a distant, much older echo in the world's first cities, where survival depended on keeping the gods from falling asleep. Each year, the entire cosmos was recreated on the streets of Babylon. For 12 days during the spring equinox, the city became a living theater where the fate of the world and the legitimacy of its king were ritually determined. This was the Akitu festival, a cornerstone of Mesopotamian life that synchronized human society with the turning of the celestial spheres. The celebration began with a startling act of chaos. The statue of the supreme god Marduk was ceremoniously removed from his inner sanctum in the Esagila temple and placed on a magnificent boat-shaped chariot. He was then pulled through the Ishtar gate and along the processional way, accompanied by the entire populace, on a journey to his Akitu house, a temple outside the city walls. This was not a simple parade. It was a symbolic reenactment of Marduk's original journey to battle the primordial sea goddess Tiamat, the central drama of the Enuma Elish creation epic. The king's role in this cosmic drama was intensely personal and politically perilous. He would enter the temple of Marduk alone, stripped of his royal regalia. In a profound act of submission, the high priest would then slap the monarch across the face and force him to kneel before the god's statue. The king would recite a shocking confession, declaring he had not sinned, neglected Babylon, or destroyed its citizens. This ritual humiliation served as a powerful check on absolute power, a public reminder that the ruler was merely a mortal servant of the divine. Only after this ordeal would the priest return the king's scepter and crown, and the crucial moment would arrive. The king would grasp the hands of Marduk's statue. This gesture, known as the hand-taking ceremony, was the ultimate renewal of his divine mandate to rule for another year. The final act was the determination of destinies. The gods, through their statues gathered in the Akitu house, would collectively decree the fates for the coming year, deciding on plagues or prosperity, war or peace. The return procession to the city was a triumphant celebration of this renewed cosmic order. But this intricate machinery of state and spirit could not withstand the rise of foreign empires. The Persian conquest introduced new gods and new ways of governing, and the arrival of Hellenistic culture after Alexander the Great further eroded the ancient traditions. The Akitu festival faded, and with it disappeared a world where a king's authority was renewed each year not by birthright, but by the symbolic slap of a priest and the grasp of a god's hands. This profound need to align human time with the time of the gods was not unique to Mesopotamia. It found a quieter, more refined expression in the sacred groves of ancient Japan. A sacred mirror reflects not a face, but a wall of spiritual armor against an invisible enemy. In the heart of Japan's Ai's Grand Shrine, the most sacred site in Shinto, priests once performed the Chinkasai, a ceremony of profound necessity designed to protect the entire complex from its greatest threat, fire. This was not a general blessing, but a precise and urgent ritual enacted with particular intensity every 20 years, when the shrine was ritually rebuilt in a tradition called Shikinen Sengu. The entire process of constructing the new, identical shrine next to the old one was a delicate spiritual operation, with vast quantities of sacred cypress wood being shaped and assembled. A single spark could annihilate centuries of continuity in an instant. The Chinkasai was the metaphysical fire brigade. Ancient records describe priests using the three sacred regalia of Japan, the mirror, the sword, and the jewel, in a precise sequence of dances and offerings. They would symbolically extinguish all fires, then perform rituals of purification over the construction materials themselves, cleansing them of any spiritual impurity that might attract disaster. Prayers were directed not against fire itself, but to the fire deities, asking for their protection and restraint during this vulnerable time. The ceremony created a spiritual barrier, a dome of cool intention over the highly flammable wooden city of the gods. This practice shows us a world where a practical concern, something we would address with building codes and sprinkler systems, was handled through the most solemn spiritual channels. The fate of a nation's soul was seen as literally intertwined with the physical preservation of its most holy site. But this deep fusion of the material and the mystical could not hold forever. As Japan modernized during the Meiji period in the 19th century, Shinto itself underwent state-led reforms that streamlined many ancient rituals. Construction methods evolved, and the immediate, visceral fear that once made the Chinkasai so vital gradually receded. The ceremony simplified, its most intricate sequences fading from memory until it was lost altogether. Its disappearance marks the quiet end of an era where protecting a building was as much a sacred act as the prayers spoken inside it. This ancient struggle to command the fundamental elements finds a powerful echo far to the west, in the deserts of the ancient Near East, where priests did not seek to prevent fire but to wield its very essence. A dragon's defeat was the key to a kingdom's survival. In the high citadel of Hattusa, capital of the mighty Hittite Empire, priests did not just tell the story of the storm god's victory over the serpent Ilianka. They ritually reenacted it every spring. This was the Purali festival, a ceremony so vital that the entire agricultural cycle and the stability of the state were believed to depend on its correct performance. Fragments of cuneiform tablets describe a spectacle of ritual combat, where the cosmic battle between order and chaos was physically staged. The king himself played a central role, consuming special foods and drinks to absorb the divine power of the victorious storm god, transforming his own body into a vessel for the land's vitality. The festival was a multi-day epic. It involved solemn processions to sacred mountain sites, where offerings were made to powerful local deities. The community gathered for vast public feasts, reinforcing the social bonds that held the empire together. This was not mere entertainment. It was a profound piece of statecraft and spiritual technology, designed to ensure that the rains would come, the crops would grow, and the king's rule would remain legitimate in the eyes of both his people and his gods. But this intricate system of belief and power vanished almost overnight. Around 1200 BCE, the entire Hittite Empire collapsed during the wider Bronze Age collapse, a chaotic period of invasion, famine, and mass migration. The great libraries of Hattusa were burned, the priests who knew the sacred words were scattered or killed, and the Purali festival was never performed again. Its loss is a stark reminder of how fragile our grandest rituals truly are, and how an entire way of speaking to the gods can be erased by the tides of history. From the fallen citadels of Anatolia, our search for lost rituals carries us across the vast Pacific Ocean. The ceremonial bowl held more than a bitter drink. It contained the entire political and spiritual order of a Polynesian society. When a new chief was to be installed, nobles gathered at the Mari, the sacred open-air temple, for the profound Ava ceremony. This was not a simple toast or celebration. It was a sacred technology for leadership transition, a way to open a channel to the divine. Special priests who held the secret knowledge of the ritual prepared the Ava, a drink made from the pounded root of the Piper methysticum plant. They followed protocols so strict that a single misstep could invalidate the entire ceremony. The root was chewed or ground and mixed with water in a dedicated wooden bowl, then strained through plant fibers to create a cloudy, earthy-tasting brew. The act of preparation itself was a prayer, each step imbuing the liquid with spiritual potency. As the Ava was served in a coconut cup according to a precise order of precedence, the new chief would consume it for the first time as ruler. The beverage's psychoactive properties, which induce a state of calm, numbing relaxation, were not for recreation. This altered state of consciousness was the entire point. It was a gateway, allowing the chief to transcend his ordinary self and commune directly with ancestral spirits and gods, receiving their wisdom and blessing for his coming reign. The ceremony was a complete package of legitimacy, involving the solemn recitation of genealogies that connected the chief to a divine lineage and the presentation of sacred regalia like staffs and feathers. The Ava was the crucial element that made these symbols live and breathe with spiritual force. Early European missionaries, however, saw only pagan intoxication. They systematically suppressed the ceremony, condemning the altered states and the connection to old gods. While the social consumption of Kava persisted and even thrives today across the Pacific, the profound spiritual engine that once powered the chiefly installation was largely dismantled. The bowl remains, but the covenant it once sealed between the chief, his people, and their ancestors has been broken. This is the quiet tragedy of a partial loss, where the outer form of a practice endures while its sacred heart is slowly forgotten. Just as the Ava ceremony connected a leader to his lineage, an ancient Chinese ritual sought to connect an emperor to the very cosmos. An emperor's most important report was not delivered to his ministers, but to the summit of a mountain. Mount Tai, the eastern peak, was considered the axis of the world in ancient China, a sacred ladder connecting the human realm directly to the celestial bureaucracy of heaven. It was here that a successful ruler, having brought peace and prosperity to his land, would undertake the ultimate act of statecraft, the Feng and Shan sacrifices. These were not mere ceremonies of thanksgiving, they were the supreme validation of the mandate of heaven, a direct and personal accounting between the Son of Heaven and the cosmic powers he served. The entire process was an epic of ritual precision. The emperor would first undergo a long period of fasting and seclusion, purifying his body and mind for the encounter. Then, under the cover of darkness, he would begin the arduous ascent, accompanied only by a small retinue of high officials. This secretive night journey symbolized his departure from the mundane world and his passage into the sacred realm. At the summit, as dawn broke, he would perform the Feng sacrifice to heaven, offering jade tablets inscribed with his achievements, sealed in stone caskets and buried for only the gods to read. He would then descend to a nearby hill to perform the Shan sacrifice to earth. Every element was codified, from the specific musical compositions that accompanied the rites to the exact number of steps and bows required. The burning of sacrificial animals sent the smoke of the offering skyward, a physical signal that the emperor had fulfilled his cosmic contract. A ruler who performed these rites successfully was not just a political leader, he was a proven partner in maintaining universal order. But this profound, personal link between the emperor and the cosmos could not be maintained indefinitely. As China evolved from the Tang dynasty onward, the imperial government became a vast, complex bureaucracy. The emperor's role shifted from that of a supreme ritualist to the head of a massive administrative machine. The idea that a single man's virtue and his direct communication with heaven could legitimize a reign began to feel archaic next to the grinding wheels of state governance. By the time of the Qing dynasty, the Feng and Shan sacrifices, which had been performed only 6 times in all of Chinese history by the most illustrious emperors, were abandoned entirely. Their disappearance marks the quiet end of a world where a mountain peak was an office of state, and an emperor's most critical duty was to file a report with the universe itself. This deep connection between a monarch and the very land they rule finds a powerful, rhythmic echo in the heart of Africa, where royal power was once affirmed not on a mountaintop, but in the beat of a drum and the strength of a sacred beast. A bronze leopard poised to strike was more than a royal symbol. It was the very embodiment of a queen's new power. In the Benin Kingdom, the creation of an Ioba, the Queen Mother, was a ritual of profound transformation, turning the king's biological mother into a semi-divine pillar of the state. Her installation ceremony was a masterpiece of political and spiritual engineering, designed to forge a new center of authority. Upon her son's ascension, she would receive her own palace in a town called Yuzulu, complete with her own court, her own staff, and even the right to command her own regiments of soldiers. She was no longer merely a royal parent, she was a co-ruler, a counterbalance to the Oba or king himself. The rituals to achieve this were intricate and deeply personal. Her body was marked with special scarification patterns unique to her office, etching her new status directly onto her skin. She was presented with a suite of sacred bronze objects, from intricate bells and ceremonial vessels to the leopard, the ultimate symbol of her fierce and independent authority. These were not decorative art, they were tools of office, consecrated to connect her directly to the ancestral spirits who guided the kingdom. Portuguese traders who witnessed the Ioba's court wrote with astonishment of her political influence and her complete ritual independence from her son. She was a sovereign in her own right, a vital part of the kingdom's governance. This brilliant system, which channeled maternal authority into a formal, sacred office, was shattered in 1897. A British punitive expedition sacked and burned Benin City, looting thousands of these very bronze ritual objects and exiling the Oba. The elaborate installation ceremony for the Ioba, a rite that had sustained a complex balance of power for centuries, was abruptly terminated. While the title of Ioba continues today in a ceremonial form, the deep spiritual and political engine that once powered it is gone. This loss is a stark example of how colonial invasion did not just conquer land, it dismantled entire sacred architectures of power. From the ashes of this West African kingdom, we journey back to ancient Anatolia, to a people whose survival depended on a ritual that could soothe a god's furious heart. The rhythmic pounding of drums in the dark could shatter a person's ordinary consciousness. In the wild highlands of ancient Phrygia, worshippers of the great mother goddess Cybele engaged in the Corybantic rites, a form of ecstatic worship that sought transcendence through absolute sensory overload. These were not quiet prayers but nights of relentless, swirling movement. Participants, known as Corybantes, would dance themselves into a feverish trance, driven by the frenetic pulse of flutes and tambourines. The goal was exhaustion, a complete breakdown of the rational self that would allow the spirit to break free and receive direct visions from the goddess. Ancient writers like the Greek philosopher Plato described how these intense states could cure spiritual maladies and emotional turmoil, offering a powerful catharsis that purified the soul. The ceremonies followed a potent emotional arc, mirroring the myth of Cybele's beloved Attis. They began with a day of ritual mourning and lamentation for his death, a collective expression of grief and loss. But this sorrow was the necessary prelude to an explosive celebration of his rebirth, a joyous frenzy that affirmed the cyclical renewal of life itself. The rituals were profoundly physical. A black meteorite, revered as the goddess herself, was carried in a solemn procession. Some male devotees, the Galli, in a moment of ultimate dedication, would perform ritual self-castration, emulating Attis to offer their fertility entirely to the goddess. This was not seen as mutilation, but as the ultimate sacrifice that transformed a man into a sacred, genderless vessel for divine power. For the Romans, who eventually adopted the cult of Cybele, these foreign rites were both fascinating and frightening. While the state sanctioned her worship, the uncontrolled, ecstatic elements were deeply suspicious to a society that prized order and discipline. Roman authorities attempted to control and sanitize the practices, restricting the more extreme expressions. The final blow came with the rise of Christianity, which viewed such ecstatic paganism as demonic possession and a direct threat to the new faith's doctrines. Church fathers condemned the rites, and the ceremonies were driven underground. While echoes of this ecstatic spirituality may have survived in folk dances and carnival traditions, the specific, profound theology behind the corybantic frenzy is gone. We lost a powerful ancient technology for emotional release, a direct channel to the divine that ran not through quiet contemplation, but through the wild, liberating beat of a drum. From this storm of Anatolian ecstasy, we find its emotional opposite in the meticulously structured sorrow of Mesopotamia, where the very survival of cities depended on the correct performance of grief. The monthly summons of names was a bulwark against the silent hunger of the dead. In the courtyards of Mesopotamian homes, families gathered not merely to remember, but to nourish. This was the Kispum ceremony, a pillar of Sumerian and later Babylonian life that turned the family home into a portal between worlds. Each month, as the moon cycled, the living would prepare a feast for the dead. They would pour out cool, fresh water, the most precious libation in that arid land, and recite a long, rolling list of names, calling upon their ancestors for generations back. Food offerings of bread, beer, and dates were laid out, a tangible act of care meant to sustain the spirits in the bleak underworld. Cuneiform tablets from sites like Nippur give us the very words they spoke, formal invitations for the ancestors to come, eat, drink, and bless their living descendants. This was not sentimental remembrance, it was a critical transaction. A well-fed, honored ancestor became a benevolent protector, a guardian spirit who could intercede with the higher gods on the family's behalf. But a neglected, hungry spirit could transform into a terrifying etimu, a hostile ghost that brought sickness and misfortune. The Kispum ritual was therefore a matter of practical family security, a monthly renewal of a sacred contract that stretched back through time. It bound the living and the dead into a single, continuous lineage, giving each new generation its place in a grand, unbroken chain. This profound sense of identity and obligation provided immense social stability, grounding society in the sanction of the ancestors themselves. But the chains of this lineage were slowly broken. The Persian conquest introduced Zoroastrian ideas that viewed the dead differently, and the final, decisive blow came with the spread of Islam, whose monotheistic theology had no room for such direct, familial dealings with spirits. The practice faded from public life, its intimate feasts replaced by more abstract prayers, while echoes of it persist in regional folk traditions that honor the dead. The specific, monthly, name-reciting covenant of the Kispum is gone. We are left to wonder about the final generation that chose not to call the names, and the profound silence that fell when the last offering was never made. This deep, familial connection to the past finds a startlingly different expression across the ocean, in the cliffside cities of the ancestral pueblones, where survival was negotiated not with the dead, but with the life-giving sun itself. A jaguar spirit could wear a human face. In the sweltering lowlands of ancient Mexico, the Olmec civilization forged a terrifying bond with the jungle's supreme predator through a ritual of profound transformation. Their rulers did not merely hunt the jaguar, they sought to become it in the Were-Jaguar ceremony, a shamanic practice designed to erase the line between human and beast. Archaeological finds like the haunting sculptures from La Venta and San Lorenzo show this fusion in stark detail: human infants and powerful adults with distinctively feline features, snarling mouths, flattened noses, and cleft heads. These were not mythical monsters, they were portraits of a spiritual ideal. To achieve this state, an Olmec lord would undergo a powerful ordeal. He would don a heavy jaguar pelt, its scent and texture helping to shed his human identity. The ritual likely involved the use of potent hallucinogens, perhaps derived from sacred mushrooms or toads, to shatter ordinary perception and open a gateway to the jaguar's world. There was also ritual bloodletting, using sharpened stingray spines or obsidian blades to draw blood as an offering, a painful sacrifice that fueled the metaphysical transition. In this altered state, the ruler was not pretending, he was channeling. He was believed to gain the jaguar's strength, its stealth, and its authority over both the physical and spiritual worlds. This transformation served a vital political and cosmic purpose. By publicly demonstrating this connection, a ruler proved he was no ordinary man, but a being who could commune with the forces of nature itself, a living bridge between his people and the raw power of the jungle. His ability to journey spiritually in this form could secure blessings for the harvest or divine threats from enemies. But this foundational shamanic tradition could not survive the collapse of Olmec society around 400 BC. As their great ceremonial centers were abandoned, the precise knowledge of how to summon the jaguar's spirit faded into the humid air. While the symbol of the jaguar would echo for centuries through Maya and Aztec cultures, the original, visceral ritual of becoming one was lost, leaving us with only stone faces frozen in mid-transformation. From the primordial jungles of the Americas, our search for lost divine connections carries us to the ancient forests of India, where an even older ritual sought to harness the power of a sacred plant. A consecrated stallion's freedom was the ultimate test of a king's power. For 1 full year, a chosen horse was released to wander the boundaries of a Vedic kingdom, followed at a distance by the king's own warriors. Any rival chieftain who dared to challenge or capture the animal was declaring war on the authority behind it. But if the horse returned unopposed after its long circuit, its path had magically traced the undisputed borders of an empire. This was the Ashvamedha, the grand horse sacrifice, a ritual so immense it was the pinnacle of ancient Indian statecraft. The ceremony unfolded in stages of breathtaking complexity, meticulously detailed in texts like the Shatapatha Brahmana. The selected stallion was first consecrated in a sacred bath, transforming it from a mere animal into a living embodiment of royal power and cosmic energy. During its year of wandering, it was not merely observed but protected as a divine emissary. Upon its return, the real ritual began, a multi-day spectacle of chanting and offerings. The horse was ritually smothered, an act meant to release its accumulated spiritual potency, not to inflict pain. The most startling part involved the chief queen. In a symbolic act of fertility and regeneration, she would ritually lie beside the dead stallion, engaging in a dialogue with priests to ensure the land's continued fruitfulness. The entire ceremony culminated in the distribution and consumption of the sacrificial meat, a communal act that bonded the kingdom to the cosmic order the ritual had affirmed. This was not simple pageantry, it was a spiritual technology for imperial expansion, proving a king's control was not just political but divinely sanctioned. But this worldview, where sovereignty was measured by a horse's wanderings, could not hold. As the Gupta period waned, the rise of Buddhism and reformed Hindu traditions like Bhakti emphasized non-violence, personal devotion, and inner spirituality over grandiose public sacrifices. The philosophical climate shifted from external ritual to internal enlightenment. The Ashvamedha, with its central act of animal death and its focus on earthly dominion, became an anachronism. It faded from practice, surviving only as a symbolic memory in later epics. Its disappearance marks a profound evolution in Indian thought, the moment a civilization began to look inward for the divine, rather than seeking it in the path of a wandering stallion. This shift from grand imperial sacrifice brings us to a quieter, more mysterious ceremony from the ancient shores of Palestine. The silence of Carthage Tophets feels heavy with a question we can no longer answer definitively. Archaeological sites outside the ancient city reveal row upon row of small, sealed urns containing the cremated remains of infants and young children, each buried with a small inscribed stone. These were the children of Carthage's most elite families, and the markers bear a chillingly consistent dedication, a vow made to the god Baal-Hamon. Classical historians like Diodorus Siculus described a horrifying scene, a bronze statue of the god with arms outstretched over a fiery pit, its hands tilted so that any offering placed upon them would roll down into the flames below. He claimed that during times of plague or military threat, the city's nobility would sacrifice their firstborn sons in this way to appease the deity and secure divine favor. The ritual process would have been starkly formal, beginning with purification rites for the parents and priests, a solemn procession to the sacred precinct known as the Tophet, and the rhythmic chanting of specific prayers. The final act was the cremation and the careful, respectful placement of the tiny bones in an urn, accompanied by a permanent stone testament to the vow fulfilled. Modern scholars fiercely debate the interpretation. Were these the remains of children who died naturally and were then offered to the gods in a sacred burial, or is the grim testimony of the ancient writers to be believed? The truth may lie in a horrifying middle ground, where the line between a desperate spiritual plea and the cruel logic of ultimate sacrifice was tragically thin. For the Carthaginians, this may have represented the most profound transaction imaginable, giving the most precious thing a family possessed to ensure the survival of the entire community. The Roman destruction of Carthage in 146 BC eradicated the practice from the urban center, though echoes of similar rites may have persisted in remote villages for a time. Its complete disappearance, however, means we have lost the ability to comprehend the mindset that could see such an act not as monstrous, but as necessary, a terrible price paid to hold back the darkness. This Mediterranean concept of a shattering offering finds a different resonance far to the north, in the vast, frozen forests of Siberia, where communication with the spirit world was not bought with a life, but earned through an arduous, personal journey. A bear cub raised with reverence inside an Ainu village was not a pet but a divine guest. For the indigenous Ainu people of Japan's northern islands, the Ayamonte, or bear-sending ceremony, was the most sacred act of reciprocity with the spirit world. They believed that gods, known as kami, visited the human world disguised as animals, offering their flesh and fur as gifts to ensure human survival. The bear, the mightiest of the mountain kami, was the most honored of these divine visitors. The community would capture a young cub and raise it for up to 2 years, feeding it the finest foods and treating it with the utmost respect. This was not a period of domestication but one of hosting, a long preparation for the spirit's grand return home. When the time for the ceremony arrived, the entire village would gather. The atmosphere was not one of sorrow but of profound gratitude and solemn celebration. The people adorned the bear with sacred carvings and offered it special cakes and wine, a final feast before its journey. Amidst ritual dancing and chanting, the elder would shoot the bear with ceremonial arrows, an act designed to release its spirit, not to kill it cruelly. The belief was that the spirit, now laden with the people's prayers and treated with such honor, would return to the mountain gods and speak well of the Ainu, ensuring that the Kami would continue to send their animal brethren for the hunt. This ceremony wove the community into the very fabric of the natural world, viewing every hunt as a sacred exchange, not a simple act of taking. But this intricate spiritual relationship was systematically dismantled. Under intense Japanese assimilation policies from the 19th century onward, the Ainu language, customs, and especially the Ayamonte were suppressed and outlawed, branded as primitive and barbaric. The sacred thread connecting the people to the mountain gods was violently cut. While there have been moving cultural revival efforts in recent decades, the ceremony as a living, breathing pillar of a spiritual world, was nearly erased, representing the tragic erosion of countless indigenous relationships with the natural world. This deep reverence for an animal spirit finds a starkly different echo in the ancient mists of Britain, where a people sought to protect their land not by sending a spirit home, but by sinking their most precious possessions into the water. A human head was not a trophy of war, but a vessel of sacred power. For the Celtic tribes of Iron Age Europe, the head was the very seat of the soul, a container of spiritual energy that could be captured, preserved, and harnessed. The classical historian Diodorus Siculus wrote with a mix of horror and fascination about Celtic chieftains who would carefully embalm the heads of their most respected enemies in cedar oil, storing them in ornate chests and proudly displaying them to honored guests. These were not mere grisly souvenirs, they were talismans of immense power. At archaeological sites like in Tremont in southern France, we find chilling evidence of this belief carved in stone, with niches designed specifically for the display of human skulls. Some of these skulls even have holes drilled into them, likely so they could be mounted on poles or the lintels of homes, transforming them into permanent guardians. The entire process was a sacred ritual. It began with ritual combat where a warrior sought not just to kill an opponent, but to secure a head of high status, believing that the greater the foe, the more potent the captured power. After the battle, skilled individuals would perform preservation rites, using oils and herbs to stave off decay, maintaining the physical vessel so the spirit within would not dissipate. Finally, there were likely periodic ceremonies where these heads were honored, spoken to, and consulted, as the Celts believed the soul's wisdom and strength remained accessible. This was a profound form of ancestral veneration, but with a crucial twist: the ancestors could be adopted from the ranks of the most formidable enemies. The Roman conquest of Gaul and Britain systematically dismantled this practice. To the Romans, with their own very different funerary customs, this was barbaric mutilation, a practice to be stamped out. As Celtic society was absorbed into the Roman Empire, the sacred head cults faded, though the powerful symbol of the head continued to echo for centuries in their art, staring out from metalwork and stone carvings. The loss of this ritual marks the end of a unique European understanding of the soul, one that saw spiritual power not as an abstract force, but as a tangible essence that could literally be held in your hands. From this intimate communion with the human head, we travel to a continent where an entire spiritual world was mapped onto the land itself, a world accessed through one of humanity's oldest rituals. A final farewell among the Tiwi people was not a single day of mourning, but a season of sacred theater. For months, the community would prepare for the Pukumani ceremony, an epic ritual of songs, dances, and towering art designed to safely escort the spirit of the deceased to its island home in the afterlife. The entire process was a profound act of love and obligation, a way for the living to complete the journey for the dead. Central to this were the tutini, burial poles carved from ironwood and painted with intricate crosshatch designs that mapped the clan's relationship to the land and the ancestral beings. These were not mere markers, they were spiritual conduits, as anthropologists like C.W.M. Hart observed in the early 20th century. Each pole was erected around the grave to create a sacred boundary, a protected space where the spirit could begin its transformation. The community would gather, their bodies painted in brilliant white clay and ochre patterns that connected them to the dreaming, the foundational era of creation. For days, they performed ritual dances that reenacted the deeds of ancestral heroes, their movements and songs forming a living roadmap for the departing soul. This was not a somber dirge, but a vibrant, collective act of storytelling that wove the individual's life back into the eternal tapestry of Tiwi lore. The ceremony was the ultimate social glue, teaching the young about their lineage and responsibilities while mending any social rifts caused by the death. But this profound cycle of mourning and renewal was violently interrupted. Christian missionaries, viewing the practices as pagan, actively suppressed the Pukumani, pressuring communities to adopt Western burial customs. The deep connection between the carved poles, the painted bodies, and the spirit's journey was severed. While dedicated elders and artists today work tirelessly to revive the carving and dancing, the ceremony as a complete, living spiritual technology guiding every soul to its rest has been profoundly fractured. Its decline represents one of the quietest and most profound losses, the silencing of a song that could literally show a spirit the way home. This deep need to properly escort the dead finds a startlingly different expression in the world's first cities, where the afterlife was not a quiet island, but a bustling, shadowy metropolis requiring a very different kind of guide. A lunar eclipse was a direct threat to the throne itself. In the heart of Mesopotamia, when the moon began to vanish from the night sky, it was not seen as a celestial event but as a divine conspiracy, a direct omen that the gods were plotting against the king. The response was not prayer, but a breathtakingly cynical piece of political theater known as the substitute king ritual. Cuneiform tablets from the Neo-Assyrian period detail this chilling procedure with bureaucratic precision. The moment court astronomers predicted an eclipse, a state of emergency was declared. The real king and queen would immediately step down from their thrones, ritually humbling themselves to avert the divine gaze. A substitute was then urgently found, often a simple gardener, a mentally unstable man, or a condemned criminal from the streets. This commoner was not simply a stand-in, he was a living sacrifice. He was dressed in the royal robes, given the royal scepter, and even fed the king's own meals, all to perfectly absorb the lethal curse intended for the true monarch. For 100 days, this substitute reigned as a puppet sovereign, performing trivial royal duties while the actual king lived in hiding, referred to only as the farmer in official documents to complete the deception. The entire court participated in this elaborate lie, a collective act of magic designed to fool the gods themselves. When the danger period finally passed, the ritual reached its grim and inevitable conclusion. To ensure the omen was permanently destroyed, the substitute king and his queen, if one had been provided for him, were ritually executed. Their bodies were then buried with full royal honors, a final act of deception to convince any watching spirits that the true king was dead. This was the ultimate insurance policy, a human life traded for the stability of the empire. The practice could not survive the advance of knowledge. As Babylonian astronomy grew more sophisticated, allowing priests to predict eclipses with greater accuracy, the sheer terror of the event diminished. The rise of new political philosophies, where a ruler's power came from administrative control rather than direct divine favor, also made the ritual obsolete. Why kill a man for an event you could now forecast on a clay tablet? The last known substitute king was installed in the 7th century BCE, and the practice faded into history. Its disappearance marks a pivotal shift, the moment humanity began to outgrow the need to sacrifice a man to appease the sky. From this dark ritual of Mesopotamian statecraft, we journey to the vast blue expanse of the Pacific, where an entire civilization once charted its course by a ceremony that has since been washed away by the tide. For 4 sacred months, the rhythm of life across Hawaii transformed entirely. The Makahiki Festival was a time when the sounds of war clubs were replaced by the cheers from sporting grounds, a complete societal ceasefire in honor of the god Lono. This was not a simple harvest celebration. It was a grand, island-wide ritual that realigned human society with the natural world. When the star cluster Pleiades first appeared on the horizon at sunset, a profound kapu, or sacred prohibition, fell over the islands. All warfare ceased, all deep-sea fishing was halted, and the community turned inward for a season of games, tribute, and spiritual renewal. The most visible sign of this change was the procession of the Akua Loa, the long god. This tall wooden structure, draped in white kapa cloth and adorned with feathers, was carried on a long pole in a clockwise circuit around each island. The procession stopped at every district boundary, at every significant Ahupua land division, where the local chief would present the annual tribute. This was not a harsh tax, but a sacred offering, a tangible return of the land's bounty to the god who provided it. The collected food, cloth, and other goods were not hoarded by the high chief, but were later redistributed among the people, reinforcing the idea of a shared, cyclical prosperity. The sporting events were far more than simple entertainment. They were ritual tests of a community's vital energy. Men competed in boxing, wrestling, and spear-throwing contests, their physical prowess a direct reflection of the land's own fertility and strength. The entire festival was a carefully orchestrated inversion of the normal political order, a temporary sacred kingdom ruled by the peace-bringing Lono. Climax came with the closing ceremony, when the high chief would ritually engage in a mock battle with the god's image, symbolically defeating Lono and reclaiming his political power for the new year. This act perfectly balanced the forces of nature and culture, peace and sovereignty. The arrival of European explorers and missionaries shattered this delicate equilibrium. Captain Cook's arrival during the Makahiki season in 1779 was initially interpreted by some Hawaiians as the literal return of Lono himself, a tragic misunderstanding that highlights the ceremony's deep cultural power. Christian conversion in the early 19th century, backed by new laws, systematically dismantled the old kapu system. The processions ended, the games were suppressed, and the sacred ceasefire was broken forever. The loss of the Makahiki represents more than the end of a festival. It marks the severing of a cyclical relationship with time and nature, a rhythm of life that had sustained Hawaiian society for centuries. In the absolute darkness of a Mithraeum, the only light fell upon the stone carving of a god driving his dagger into the neck of a cosmic bull. For a Roman soldier or merchant initiated into the cult of Mithras, this was not a static image but a living drama, a sacred mystery reenacted just for him. This was the Tauroctony, the bull-slaying scene that formed the heart of a secret initiation ceremony promising spiritual rebirth and salvation. The windowless sanctuaries, often built underground or in caves, were designed for maximum theatrical impact. Archaeologists have found evidence for hidden trapdoors, slots for moving statues, and niches for lamps that could be suddenly uncovered, creating stark, moving shadows that brought the myth to life. An initiate would progress through 7 distinct grades, each with its own symbolic costume, like that of the raven or the lion, and its own secret knowledge. The rituals were a full-body experience. They began with symbolic purification, perhaps with water or honey. Then came the sacred meal, where initiates would recline on stone benches, sharing bread and wine in a ritual recreation of the feast Mithras shared with the sun god Sol, forging a direct bond of fellowship among the brothers of the cult. Some scholars suggest the airtight, torch-lit chambers, with their limited oxygen and flickering light, were deliberately used to induce altered states of consciousness, making the initiate's journey feel terrifyingly and wondrously real. This powerful, personal path to salvation, so appealing to the individual in a vast empire, could not survive the rise of a new state religion. When Christianity became the official faith of Rome in the 4th century, the Mithraic mysteries were systematically suppressed. Their underground temples were sealed or converted, and the precise knowledge of how to stage the Tauroctony initiation vanished forever. Yet echoes of its communal meals and its language of spiritual rebirth resonate in traditions that followed, a ghostly imprint of a once vibrant faith. So here we stand at the end of our journey, having witnessed 28 rituals from across the globe vanish into silence. What profound human thread connects the bloodletting of a Maya king to the sacred silence of Eleusis, or the emperor's run in Egypt to the quiet ancestor feast in Mesopotamia? They all represent humanity's fundamental drive to build a bridge between our fragile world and something greater, to find meaning in the chaos of nature and the certainty of death. These ceremonies were not superstitions, they were sophisticated technologies of the spirit, each one a unique answer to the eternal questions of who we are and why we are here. Their disappearance leaves us with a haunting void, a reminder of the countless ways we have learned and forgotten how to speak to the universe. These common threads weave a tapestry of shared human longing. From the deserts of Egypt to the islands of Polynesia, people used remarkably similar methods to answer the same fundamental questions. They all sought a connection to the divine, a way to plead for rain, to ensure the sun would rise, or to comprehend the mystery of death. The seasons dictated their sacred calendars, turning the solstices and equinoxes into moments of cosmic realignment. And in every case, the goal was transformation, a change in state so profound it could turn a commoner into a king, a living person into a divine messenger, or a simple drink into a conduit for the gods. The specialized tools used in these rites were not just props, they were sacred technology, each one a key designed to unlock a specific spiritual door. This pattern reveals a universal human blueprint, a deep-seated need to create order from chaos and find meaning in the vast, indifferent universe. Yet if these rituals were so powerful, so deeply embedded in the human psyche, why did they vanish? The answer is not a single event, but a slow, relentless tide of change. The rise of new, centralized religions offered different paths to salvation, often with a single god who demanded exclusive loyalty. Empires expanded, crushing local traditions beneath the weight of a homogenized state culture. Knowledge itself evolved, as astronomy replaced celestial omens and medicine offered explanations where only spiritual cures had existed before. In some cases, the societies that created these rituals collapsed so completely that there was no one left to remember the sacred words. The disappearance of each ceremony was a quiet extinction, the closing of a unique window into the human soul. A king's power could be shattered not just by an army, but by a new idea. The intricate tapestry of ancient rituals did not simply fray over time, it was often torn apart by the sheer force of history. Conquest stands as one of the most brutal agents of this loss. When Roman legions marched through Celtic lands, they did more than defeat warriors. They systematically dismantled the druidic class that presided over ceremonies like the Wicker man, viewing their power as a direct threat to Roman authority. Similarly, Spanish conquistadors in the Andes saw the sacred Capacocha not as a profound dialogue with mountain gods, but as a demonic practice to be eradicated with extreme prejudice. In these cases, the old gods were literally outlawed, and the rituals that gave a people their identity were violently severed from the land. But sometimes the change was more subtle, a quiet evolution of faith from within. The great Vedic horse sacrifice, the Ashvamedha, did not end with a bang but with a philosophical whisper, as Buddhist and Bhakti traditions emphasized compassion and inner devotion. The spectacle of a public animal slaughter to validate a king's earthly power began to feel spiritually hollow. The divine was now found in the heart, not in the path of a wandering stallion. This was not destruction, but a transformation of consciousness that made the old rituals feel obsolete. The Lupercalia's riotous run through Rome was not banned overnight. It was slowly absorbed and sanitized by a rising Christian culture that redirected the human need for seasonal purification into the solemnity of Candlemas. At other times, the very foundation of society crumbled, taking its ceremonies down with it. The Minoan bull leaping ceremony was not voted out of existence. It vanished when the entire palatial system that staged it collapsed under Mycenaean invasion. The priests who knew the precise steps, the artisans who crafted the ceremonial attire, the audience that understood the symbolism, all were dispersed or absorbed into a new culture with different gods and different spectacles. The ritual died because the world that gave it meaning ceased to exist. Environmental pressures often accelerated this process, as prolonged droughts or famines could make a community lose faith in the very rituals that were supposed to ensure their survival, as may have happened with the bloodletting rites of the Maya. And then there is knowledge itself, the quiet killer of certain kinds of magic. The Mesopotamian substitute king ritual, a terrifying piece of state-sponsored magic, became unnecessary not because of a new religion, but because of a new calculation. When court astronomers could predict an eclipse with reliable accuracy, the event lost its terror. It was no longer a divine conspiracy, but a predictable alignment of celestial bodies. Why sacrifice a man for an event you could chart on a clay tablet? The ritual was made redundant by the very human ingenuity that once fueled its mystery. In this light, the disappearance of a ritual is not always a tragedy, but sometimes a sign of progress. Yet, it is a profound mistake to think these practices vanished without a trace. More often, they transformed. Elements of the Roman Lupercalia may echo in modern carnival, and the veneration of ancestors in the Mesopotamian Kispum finds its distant cousin in Dia de los Muertos altars. The outer form adapts even when the original sacred engine has fallen silent. Recognizing these complex causes, from violent conquest to peaceful evolution, allows us to see the loss of ancient ceremonies not as a simple forgetting, but as a deep and integral part of the human story. It forces us to ask a final, haunting question. In our modern, hyper-rational world, what have we, in turn, lost the ability to hear? Our journey through these 28 lost ceremonies reveals a breathtaking spectrum of human imagination. We have seen how cultures from every corner of the globe developed unique and intricate ways to speak to the divine, to mourn their dead, and to plead for the sun's return. Each ritual was a complete world of meaning, a sophisticated technology for navigating the terrifying mysteries of existence. Their disappearance is not merely a historical footnote. It represents the quiet extinction of entire ways of seeing, entire conversations with the universe that were conducted in languages we can no longer fully understand. We lost not just actions, but the profound worldviews they encoded. This incredible diversity of spiritual expression underscores a universal human truth: our deep, unyielding need to find structure in chaos and to feel connected to something greater than ourselves. While we cannot, and perhaps should not, attempt to revive most of these ancient practices, their loss leaves empty spaces in the grand tapestry of human experience. These voids remind us that our spiritual landscape is not fixed, but is a constantly shifting terrain where traditions emerge, transform, and sometimes vanish completely. The forces of conquest, evolving knowledge, and changing beliefs have all played their part in this endless process of creation and erasure. Yet the fundamental human impulse for ritual has never gone away. It simply finds new forms: the collective excitement of a sports stadium, the solemnity of a graduation ceremony, the quiet routines of our daily lives. These are the new vessels for our ancient need for meaning and connection. They echo the old patterns of community bonding and symbolic action, even if we no longer dress them in the robes of gods and ancestors. As you reflect on these 28 vanished fires, consider the rituals that give shape and significance to your own life. What ceremonies mark your passages, console your grief, or celebrate your community? And ponder this: how will future generations look back at our own practices, seeing in them the same fragile, beautiful, and ultimately human attempts to make sense of a vast and mysterious cosmos? If this exploration into humanity's lost spiritual heritage has intrigued you, we would love to hear which of these vanished rituals most captured your imagination. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the heart of historical mysteries.